What's the word, people? It's your boy John back at you with another reaction video, man. Today I got for you the most luckiest people who survived the impossible. Oh man, this feel like oh man, this is crazy. I was just looking at it. Bear attacks, pole to the brain, stuck indoors, volcanoes, freezing death, shocked to death. What's that, parachuting? This is crazy right here. Final destination all day right here. Let's go ahead and get straight to this video right here. Let's get it.
Phineas Gage. It was September 13th, 1848. Phineas Gage was a foreman at a railroad construction in Cavendish, Vermont, when the unbelievable happened. He was using a tamping iron to pack sand and clay into the hole above the explosive powder. But as he was doing this, he got distracted, and the tamping iron sparked against the rock. The powder exploded, sending the 43 inches long, 1.25 inch diameter rod straight through his mouth and brain. The rod perforated his left cheek, passing through his left eye and the left side of the brain. The tamping iron landed point first some 80 feet away, covered with blood and brain matter. Gage was thrown onto his back and had some brief convulsions of the arms and legs, but spoke within a few minutes. He also walked with little assistance and sat upright in an ox cart for the 3/4 mile ride to his motel in town to seek medical help. The doctors were astonished and didn't believe what had happened. Despite losing his left eye and part of his brain, Gage was able to recover somehow and was walking normally within 3 weeks after the accident. But it wasn't long until those closest to him noticed something was wrong. He went from a well-mannered and calm man to an aggressive one. His friends and acquaintances said he was no longer Gage. He started suffering convulsions a few months after the accident and died 9 years later at the age of 36 due to epileptic seizures. In 2012, researchers found that Phineas Gage had lost 11% of his white matter and 4% of his cortex, mostly in the frontal lobes. Natalia Pasternak.
So he started having seizures and mood swings after losing that. And he lasted for 9 years. That's lucky. That's really, really lucky. But I'm sure back then ain't nobody know what was going on with him because science wasn't the same back then. So yeah, he's lucky. Let's get to his next one.
One spring afternoon in May 2015, after finishing her work at the post office, 55-year-old Natalia Pasternak, her dog, and her 80-year-old friend Valentina Gorodetskaya all went to the nearby forest to collect birch sap when the unimaginable happened. While walking through the Siberian forest in the far east of Russia, they inadvertently crossed paths with a giant brown bear. The beast initially attacked the dog, but quickly set its sights on Natalia, mother of 3. After attempting to rescue her friend by hitting the wild animal with a stick, Valentina ran away to seek help, but not before the beast scratched her back, leaving Natalia to face death. During the hour-long ordeal, the wild animal clawed her shoulders, legs, arms, and head, even scalping her. Thinking her mauled prey was already dead, the bear dragged its victim some distance and then covered most of her body with earth and debris to eat her later. Eventually, wildlife inspectors arrived at the scene and found the bear protecting its kill. They shot him 5 times. Soon thereafter, they realized the partly covered Natalia was still breathing, but seriously injured. She was rushed to the hospital, where they managed to stabilize her after spending 5 hours on the operating table. Juliana Kupska. On Christmas Eve, 1971.
I done seen a lot of situations, old videos of people getting attacked by bears. Them bears be really tearing them up. Drop and play dead if you want to. You're gonna get buried like she did with some mud. Don't do that.
17-year-old Juliana Kupska was flying over the Peruvian Amazon jungle with her mother when a nightmare ensued. 15 minutes before they were supposed to land, the sky suddenly grew black. The plane unknowingly flew into a violent thunderstorm and was struck by lightning. One massive flash of white light hit the plane's wing, which sent the aircraft into a nosedive. However, the plane began to disintegrate before plummeting to the ground. Kupska found herself falling, still strapped to her row of seats, 10,000 feet into the Amazon rainforest.
Wow.
Before hitting the ground, however, she lost consciousness. She woke up the next day alive and alone in the rainforest. Her seats served as a parachute which slowed her fall. The impact was also lessened by the rising current from the thunderstorm Kupska fell through, as well as the thick foliage at her landing site. She survived the fall but suffered injuries such as a broken collarbone, a deep cut on her right arm, an eye injury, and a concussion. Her nightmare was far from over. She was able to walk, but she couldn't see well after having lost her glasses during the fall, and she had to deal with the dangers of the jungle, such as jaguars, snakes, and poisonous frogs. Somehow, she managed to find a creek and followed it downstream. walking in the middle of it as it was safer than walking through the jungle. After 9 days alone in the jungle, dealing with severe insect bites, extreme hunger, and an infestation of maggots in her injured arms, she was able to find a hut with a palm leaf roof, an outboard motor with a large boat, and a liter of gasoline. She sucked the gasoline out and put it into the wound. The pain was intense as the maggots tried to get further into the wound. She pulled out about 30 maggots while suffering excruciating pain. Exhausted, she decided to spend the night there. The next day, she heard the voices of several men outside. When they saw her, they were alarmed and stopped talking. They thought she was a water goddess, but once she explained what had happened, they treated her wounds and gave her something to eat, and the next day took her back to civilization. She was soon airlifted to a hospital, where she recovered and reunited with her father. She later found that as many as 14 other passengers were later discovered to have survived the initial crash, but died while waiting to be rescued, including her mother. It was later revealed that the plane she was in at the time had a bad reputation because of some recent crashes, and adding to the danger, they pushed through the storm, even though it was unsafe, just to meet the holiday schedule. The airline lost its license and closed 11 days after the accident. Casey Wagner.
Oh no, they would have to give me some money. Sometimes they gotta pay some type of way. I lost my mom's, and I went through hell and back in the rainforest because you trying to get some money with your faulty planes. Oh no, you gotta pay me some type of way. Somebody gotta pay me for that. But hey.
One fall afternoon in October 2013, 31 years old Casey Wagner was attending an annual off-road event called Rednecks with Paychecks in St. Joe, Texas, when storm clouds started rolling in above. He decided to take refuge under some trees while waiting for a friend to return from the bathroom, when out of nowhere, he saw sparks flying off the tree trunk. Casey was suddenly struck by lightning, and while he was mid-air, a second bolt hit his work boots before he could even hit the ground. The bolt shot up his leg and traveled through the side of his body and his left arm. Wagner began yelling for help as he lay there paralyzed. As luck would have it, a nearby nurse rushed to his aid and kept him calm until paramedics arrived. Astoundingly, Wagner escaped with only minor injuries and was released from the hospital after spending only one night in observation. Apart from being left with shortness of breath, sore muscles, and feeling weird, Casey is a walking miracle. To put that into perspective, the chance of being hit by lightning in the US is 1 in a million, and Casey was not only hit once, but twice in a matter of seconds. Candela.
Oh, he is super lucky. But, you know, God probably struck him down for something he had did in the past. He just don't even know it yet. I'm just saying.
At the end of March 2022, a girl named Candela was waiting for a train in Argentina's capital, Buenos Aires, when she suddenly found herself losing consciousness. What happened next was frightening. She lost her balance and fell to her knees, her head landing in a narrow gap between two subway wagons and her body between the subway and the platform. People nearby were shocked, thinking they had watched the tragic death of a young woman. Little did they know, they just experienced a miracle. When the subway stopped, people rushed to get her out from under the carriages. Surprisingly, she was alive, quickly regained consciousness, and seemed unharmed. She was immediately rushed to the hospital, where she was diagnosed with a broken rib, a perforated liver, a skull fracture between her nose and eyebrow, and a head concussion, which caused her to lose hearing in one ear. Yuwa Wisniewska. It was February.
She was lucky. You almost got rammed over by a train, and that's all you came up with. That is real true luck there.
2007, and German paraglider Yuwa Wisniewska was in Australia preparing for the World Paragliding Championship when the unthinkable happened.
Why?
After ignoring the warnings of violent thunder...
Why are you paragliding? Why are you paragliding? That's gotta be one of the most stupidest hobby, sport, or whatever you want to call it ever. Why are you doing that? Come on, man.
Storms, she decided to take off. Shortly thereafter, while passing beneath the storm clouds, she was swallowed into the ascending current of a cumulonimbus cloud, which has a very powerful vertical upward force. She did not stand a chance. Unable to get out, she was lifted at a speed of 48 miles per hour to an altitude of 32,986 feet, according to her GPS. To put that into perspective, it is higher than Mount Everest. As lightning flashed around her, she was pelted by hailstones the size of baseballs and experienced temperatures of minus 67 degrees Fahrenheit, losing consciousness in the process. 45 minutes later, she miraculously woke up disoriented, tired, and covered in ice. Her altitude was now 22,966 feet. She escaped the storm and safely landed 3.5 hours later, about 37 miles north of her starting position on a nearby farm, suffering only minor frostbite in her extremities. Danny
She
Balk.
lucky.
It was May 1980, and Danny Balk and his friend Brian Thomas were violently woken during a camping trip in Washington state in the Pacific Northwest. It was the eruption of Mount St. Helens, and the blast was heading toward the meadow they were camping in with 4 other friends. As they ran for their lives, looking for shelter in some trees when the day turned black, Balk was hit by a tree-flattening blast of heat and a shower of ash, mud, and ice that caked him in grit and pushed him flat to the ground. In seconds, he went from frozen to baked. When Balk got up, he yelled for Thomas, then crawled into the river to soothe his burned hands and left leg in the river's warm, muddy water. He resumed his search, scrambling over downed trees until he felt a hand on his left shoulder that pushed him off balance. He looked down and saw Thomas under a tangle of tree limbs. Thomas had a broken hip, and the skin was peeling off Balk's burned hands. But somehow, Balk could pull his friend up to the top of the tangle just as ash started to fall. After that, they went looking for their friends. Balk and Thomas were still on the pile of tree debris 2 hours after the blast, with their shirt collars pulled over their noses and mouths to screen out ash, when Balk saw 2 of their friends, Nelson and his girlfriend Ruff, making their way through the downed trees toward them. The 2 men carried Thomas to the ruins of an old cabin, where they built a makeshift lean-to, and learned that his other 2 friends, Terry and Karen, had died. Leaving Thomas behind, Balk, Nelson, and Ruff then hiked out seeking help, but Balk was barefoot during the whole ordeal. He had been scrambling from downed tree to downed tree to avoid hot ash. Luckily, they were spotted at about 6 p.m., more than 9 hours later after the nightmare began, by 2 rescue helicopters. Balk didn't forget about his injured friend and guided the rescuers to save him. He was airlifted to St. John Medical Center in Longview, where he and Thomas were hospitalized. Once the painkillers kicked in, Balk didn't regain consciousness until the following Sunday, 7 days later. Helen Klaben. It was February 4th, 1963, and a 21-year-old Helen Klaben was in Anchorage, Alaska, when she decided to hitchhike all the way to San Francisco by ship.
That just sounds stupid. Why are you hitchhiking from Alaska to San Francisco? What be going on?
A single-engine plane with inexperienced 42-year-old pilot Ralph Flores. Not long into the journey, however, Flores ran into a snowstorm that blew them off course. He went above the clouds to try to escape the storm, but needed to go down to see the landmarks to get to their destination. Once he did so, he immediately found himself too near the mountains and trees, and before he could react, they crashed. Miraculously, they survived, but were stranded alone in a snow-covered forest in the Canadian Yukon, in winter with temperatures as low as negative 58 degrees Fahrenheit. Helen suffered a broken arm and crushed feet, and Flores had a fractured jaw and cracked ribs. They somehow built a shelter using a piece of cloth and cushions from the plane. They also used aircraft carpets as blankets and gasoline from the fuel tank to light a fire to keep themselves warm. They had no food apart from 4 tins of sardines, 2 cans of tuna, and some fruit cocktails and crackers, which were rationed but only lasted 10 days, forcing them to make soup from melted snow. Eventually, Flores gathered enough strength to go to a nearby frozen lake, where he wrote a large SOS sign with an arrow pointing to their camp. It wasn't until 49 days after the accident that a local supplying pilot, Charles Hamilton, saw the sign, rescued them, and took them to the Whitehorse General Hospital. Though pale and exhausted, Flores could walk with support, while Miss Klaben was on a stretcher. If you liked this video, subscribe for...
That was stupid. That was stupid. They brought that on themselves. But a lot of these people haven't been touched by age, though, because there's no way that some of these people are still alive, like right now, walking today. But some of these people also brought it on themselves, like that. A lot of them just dumb. But let me know in the video what y'all think. I mean, in the comments what y'all think. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and don't do none of this stuff that they doing, like the paragliding and hitchhiking from Alaska to San Francisco. That's just stupid. But yeah, whatever. I'll let y'all know. Peace.